Secretary of State State Bellows has decided to remove a citizens' initiative from November's ballot that would have asked Mainers if they wanted to bar transgender athletes from competing in sports and using facilities that align with their gender identity. Bellows' decision comes after her staff found the group behind the petition, Protect Girls Sports, did not collect the required amount of valid signatures. According to the Secretary of State's office, any appeal of her decision must be submitted by the group in the next 10 days. Bellows says her Deputy Secretary of State deemed too many of the signatures were invalid for the proposal to move forward.
One additional unusual aspect is that one circulator, an entire sheet of signatures for specific jurisdiction in Oxford, all of those signatures were not the individual voters who were listed on that petition. So that is deeply concerning.
Because of the possibility of an appeal, Bellows will announce the final wording of the referendum question on Thursday, should it appear on the ballot.
The Maine GOP responded to Bellows' decision, the chair of the party saying, quote, State Bellows has a bad habit of abusing her power as Secretary of State for her own political agenda, and she needs to be stopped.